War II, yes. I was the engineer tail gunner on the B-24. Well, after the war, we hauled British prisoners out of Japan down to Manila. They converted our bomb bays into, they put benches in there, and they hauled these British prisoners out of Japan. And they were in prison in Japan for 5 years. They were captured at the beginning of the war in Hong Kong and Singapore. And so we hauled them out of Japan down to Manila to get them out of there as quick as we could. And they were all in bad shape, mentally, physically, and every other way. They'd been in prison for 5 years, mistreated, fed garbage, that's all they got. They threw the garbage over the fence to them. That's all they had. So we hauled them down to Manila. And we made 5 trips, and on the 6th trip, my friend, we were on the same crew, the guy that was in charge of the flight cut us off. They said they needed the space, so they cut us off. Told us we couldn't go on that mission, so we didn't go. The 2 of us were cut off. And they hauled the prisoners down to Manila, landed, put them in the hospital, and the next morning they took off to fly back to Okinawa, and the plane went down. So we lost our co-pilot, our navigator, our radio operator, and they substituted a pilot for our pilot because he was sick. He couldn't go. So actually the 3 of us were cut off. And that's what happened. Never found the plane, never found any wreckage, never found anything. I had just graduated from high school in June of 1941. Pearl Harbor took place in 41 December. And they took most of our graduating class, just took the whole thing, didn't even hesitate. And but I didn't go in till 44. I enlisted in the service in 44, March of 44, and signed up for the aviation cadet program. But they were pretty full, and they weren't losing the people they thought they were going to lose. So I went into a combat crew, signed up for a combat crew. Well, they made the crews that we took our basic training in Miami. The Army Air Force took over all the hotels on Miami Beach. I think there was like 35 hotels. They took over all the hotels and turned them into barracks. And we were stationed in the hotels. We stayed in the very ritzy hotels. We marched on Biscayne Boulevard, and they took over all the cafeterias and restaurants and turned them into mess halls. And that's the way we got our basic training. Well, it was wrong. They started it, and we finished it with the atomic bomb. And they can cry all they want, they can say all they want, but it ended the war. If it hadn't dropped the bomb, the war would have probably gone on another 2 years. And they say that losses between the Japanese and Americans would have been over 2 million. We were in Okinawa, and we were stationed in Okinawa. We ran 2 bombing missions to Japan, and on the second one, the war ended. We got a thing on the radio that the war had ended, and we didn't know how true it was, whether it was true or not, because Tokyo Rose always came on the radio and always named the crews and called pilots and named names and where we were going, and she knew all about it. So we didn't know whether it was just a false thing or was true, but it was true.
Well, how'd that make you feel when Tokyo Rose knew all that information?
Well, it's not very good when you're listening and they name your pilot and your crew and where you're going. They already know you're headed there. It's not a very good thing. She was an American. She wasn't Japanese. Well, we had a lot of them. They used different tactics. One of the ways that they would go up above the formation, and they would drop phosphorus bombs. They had phosphorus bombs which burned at a very high rate of white heat. They would drop them from their planes onto the wings of our planes. That was one of their big things. And of course, the phosphorus would burn right through the wings into the tank, into the gas tank, and that would be it. Fort Drum was the United States had the Philippines. They got them from the Spanish, I think, and they were running the Philippines before the war started. And they had a concrete battleship right in the entrance of the harbor, where any ships had to come into the harbor had to go by this ship. It was huge. It was the actual size of a battleship. It was that big. It was made out of concrete, had guns coming out the side, and during the war, the Japanese, of course, took it over, and any American ships that would come into that area would be attacked by them. And so when they took Manila, they decided that this ship had to go because the Japanese had been surrendered in every other place, but they did not give that up. So every time a American ship would come into the harbor, they'd take a shot at them, and it caused a lot of problems. So they decided it had to go. So they gave us the job of bombing it and trying to get rid of it. The concrete on the ship was 6 foot thick. The guns came out the side, and they all lived underneath the water in the bottom part of this thing. And they decided it had to go, so we took it on. We bombed it at, I would say, 75 feet, which was very unusual for a 24 that size. We bombed it, and they skip bombed, what they called skip bombed it. They skipped the bombs off the water and went up into the ship. And it didn't work. I mean, it didn't do anything but knock a few hunks of concrete off of it, but it didn't affect them at all. So after the war, I got reassigned down to Texas, and I was on a civilian train, and this career Army officer, colonel in the engineers, came and sat down beside me on the train, and we started talking, and he asked me about where I was, and I told him. He asked me if I knew about Fort Drum, and I said, yes, we did. We bombed it. We tried to destroy it. And he said, it didn't work, did it? And I said, no, it didn't. It did nothing. He said, well, let me tell you how we took care of it for you. So what they did, they took, I forget how many commandos and the 3 landing craft, and they put tanks in these landing craft, and they pumped like 10,000 gallons of fuel, diesel fuel oil, into these tanks. And they ran on the dead side where they couldn't see them, and they came up alongside of it, and they shoved these diesel hoses into the air vents of this Fort Drum. And they pumped 10,000 gallons of diesel fuel into the interior of it, just pumped it in the window, in the air vents. And then they threw hand grenades in it and set it off. And of course they all came running out and jumping off, and a lot of them were killed. But that's how they took it. And he was an Army engineer.